योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचा मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोतुं प्रवरं मुनीना Patanjali Pranjali Pranatosmi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Right. So today we're going to look at Sutra number 18. Okay, and what I'm going to do is revisit the previous sutra, which we did almost at this point 45 days back, maybe even more, because they're very interconnected. So we'll revisit that. I'll talk about that briefly, and we'll talk about 17 and 18 together, but a lot of our focus will be on 18. Okay, so sutra number 17. Vitarka vichara anandasmitanu gamata samprajnataha. Okay, so this sutra begins to talk about the kinds of samadhi. So in today's Yoga Sutra study, we're going to scientifically break down the process of samadhi. Okay, that is what Patanjali Maharishi is doing. He's such a scientist when it comes to these things. He does such a good job breaking it down. So today we'll follow his guidance and get to what does samadhi, what are the transitions of samadhi. Okay, so this is sutra number 17. Sutra number 18 is Virama Pratyaya Abhyasa Purvaha Samskara Sheshonyaha. Okay, so this is the second type of samadhi, and we'll get into each of these. So if you remember sutra number 17, samadhi was essentially broken down into two types according to Patanjali Maharishi. Okay, it was broken down into samprajnata samadhi and asamprajnata samadhi. Okay, so these two types. So samprajnata samadhi, let us revisit that first. Okay, so samadhi, when we start to describe what it is, samadhi is basically a point of consciousness beyond which there is no consciousness. Okay, that is essentially how samadhi is described, as the place where you don't have that kind of prakriti aspect of your being. Okay, so you're completely merged into the oneness. You don't have that individual type of consciousness that exists. Okay, there is the way samadhi is also treated is almost like a range. So if you look at samadhi, typically in all of the definitions, a lot of commentators, we talk about samadhi as this point, but there are a lot of interesting writings about samadhi being a range of this experience. So there is almost a beginning to the feeling or experience of samadhi, which starts at a certain point, which is typically beyond beyond the physical and the pranic sphere, right? So in the sutra number 17, if you remember, we talked about all the panchakoshas, right? We talked about the five koshas: annamaya, pranamaya, manonmaya, vijnanamaya, and anandamaya. 17 sutra specifically is talking about a samadhi that you enter into or experience with the help of something, with the help of an object, if you will. Okay, so whether it's an idol or om or a mantra or even your breath, you're using a vehicle to enter into that state of samadhi. So that is what is being defined as samprajnata samadhi. And a lot of this is directly related to the panchakoshas because we're using that apparatus in our own body to experience this outside world, right? So when we're holding on to an object and using that to transcend our experience of the object, we're essentially using this inner apparatus of antakarana, even to start with our gross body, we're trying to do the pratyahara of the senses, right? If you look at the 8 stages, it's It starts with at the very gross level of, yama, niyama, asana, and all that, and it goes into a very finer state of being. So it's almost described as a range. Now, when you look at, there is a couple of very key definitions here that we'll go through, and then I'll talk about why it's relevant to our day-to-day sadhana. That I think is the most important takeaway. Okay, so pratyaya specifically, which comes in Sutra number 18, is the ability to experience an object, to put your consciousness on an object, to hold that consciousness. That is called pratyaya. Okay, so when you keep practicing pratyaya, essentially what happens is that pratyaya falls away. So let's take a deeper dive into this. So when we think about samprajnata samadhi, and where we're saying we're going to use an object to transcend that object, we're referring to a very deep state of upasana, right? So let us say, you have an Ishta Devata, right? And you have an idol, or you have an Om or something. When you do your tratak on it, or when you do your upasana with it, you are decoding that object using all of your layers. Okay, so you're looking, I'll just take an example. Okay, so let us say Ganesha. Looking at Ganesha, initially when you start looking at Ganesha, you're approaching him with whatever you know of the god that you grew up with, right? So maybe it's a story, maybe he has a story about Ganesha and Shiva and Parvati. You're making those associations, and you're approaching this, I'm saying, object or idol with that. When you practice dharana and dhyana, okay, so in our 8 stages, the ashtang, when you look at the steps before samadhi, so what is it? Dharana, concentration, and dhyana, right? In those stages, you are essentially completely focusing on or concentrating on that object. Okay, in this example, we've taken Ganesha. So when you divert all of your senses, all of your gunas, all of your koshas, all of your internal apparatus, as well as your external, towards the single pointed focus on this object, that experience is called pratyaya. Okay, that ability to experience that object with all of this called pratyaya. So holding your single pointed focus. Now, what happens over time, and this is something, the beauty of the sutra, Yoga Sutras, right? And we studied about this in the previous couple of sutras, and even here. Abhyasa is a very important aspect. So that's what we're talking about, pratyaya. So what Patanjali Maharishi is saying is, when you take this method and you focus on an object and you do your upasana, through abhyasa, that pratyaya falls away. Okay, you are not doing anything to the pratyaya. It automatically dissolves, it falls away. And you enter into this other kind of samadhi. So Sutra number 18, if we actually read it, right? Virama pratyaya abhyasa purvaha samskara sheshonyaha. The word asamprajnaya is not there in Sutra number 18. It's inferred from Sutra number 7, because anyaha means other. So he's saying there's samprajnaya samadhi and there's the other kind. So it's inferred, a lot of commentaries infer saying that, okay, it's a samprajnaya samadhi that Maharishi is talking about. Okay, and he's very specific with his words, right? It's there's no mincing, it's very direct, and he knows what he's saying. So when we look at this other kind of samadhi, you're basically talking about the state where this pratyaya falls away and you go into a more deeper state of samadhi, where you're not using this object, you don't experience any other object. Okay, so when we look at this state and we're trying to figure out, okay, what does that look like, the breakdown that when I went through the 2 sutras that I'd written down is, in Sutra number 17, when it says Vitarka Vichara Ananda Smitanu Gamata Samprajnaha. So it starts with Vitarka, reasoning, moving into Vichara, reflection, and then Ananda, bliss, and then Asmita, a sense of individual self. So just look at this journey, right? So let us take Ganesha itself. First, you take Ganesha because somebody told you do this upasana, you'll get the best job, or you'll have a lot of money, whatever reason, or you just actually want to get into upasana, whatever the reason be, you get into it. Okay, you start with some kind of reasoning, tell yourself to get into this. When you go deeper into your practice, you start understanding what is this object that I'm focusing on? What is the real nature of this? What does Ganesha truly represent outside of that he's an elephant god with these hands and all of these weapons? Like, what is he, right? And then you start to realize, what does gender even mean here? Like, what is this power? So you go into a mode of reflection, reflecting on your reasoning. Okay, so that's vichara. And then you even transcend that and you fall in love. That is upasana, right? That is the beauty of upasana, is you fall in love with the divine. And it gives you that sense of bliss. It gives you that sense of happiness, peace, contentment, where any time you spread out your mat and you sit in front of this deity, or you sit in front of your ishta or your symbol, whatever, you fall in love. So that is the ananda and asmita. So combining all this, the understanding of your individual self at a very refined level. Okay. So when you look at sampragnata samadhi that we talked about, using an object to go from this to this to this process of sampragnata samadhi is using the pratyaya on that object to experience this from dhyana, dharana, vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita, sampragnata samadhi. Now, what asampragnata samadhi is referring to is the transitionary states between each of these. Okay, so what is basically happening across these stages that we talked about is it's not that the object necessarily is changing. Your perception of that object, your experience of that object is getting more refined. So if you take an example of even our own, when you do swadhyay, when you read even the Bhagavad Gita or whatever, right? A lot of people would say, every time I read the Gita, I look at it differently, because it means something different to you at different stages of life, because you go through life and you learn few things and you are more evolved as a soul, you're more refined as a soul to understand a depth that was not revealed to you before. Okay, the Gita is the Gita, the words are the same, they've been there for thousands and thousands of years. That did not change. What changed was your experience of it. So one of the biggest takeaways is, when we commit to a sadhana or upasana, what is changing is on the inside. The change is happening internally. And when you reach these higher levels of meditation or being, when we talk about samadhi, what is changing is that it's refining your internal apparatus. So that is why when we take that and we say, okay, this is now refined, now let me break it down further. When you go from this vitarka, vichara, ananda, there is a layer, there is like a gap, the transition between these states, where there is nothing, there is no object. When you transition between these states, there is no object, that gap. When you even look at thoughts, the gap between the thoughts, there's no thought, it's a gap, right? That part is defined as asampragnata samadhi. Okay, so it's almost looked at in the Yoga Sutras. They say even this is not the ultimate. Patanjali Maharishi is saying, imagine there's this gap where you don't have an object, but he's saying even this is not the ultimate. Because even in this gap, even after all your refinement, you still might have remnants. And this is where he uses the word samskaras. Okay, there may be remnants of tendencies or whatever that you still have, that may sprout. The seeds of samskaras some might still be there. And one of the commentaries I was reading was making this analogy of cleaning the house, right? You clean the house, there is a little bit of dust and dirt here and there, and then you keep cleaning it till you, of course, get rid of everything. So a sampragnata samadhi is still, there's something even beyond that, where the seeds of samskaras are completely burnt. That's why, when you do sadhana, they say that it burns the karmic seeds or burns, because what happens when you burn it? It cannot sprout again, right? So this in between aspect of asampragnata samadhi is one of the highest states for us to be in when we think of samadhi. We haven't even gotten to the nirbija, which is, the complete end where nothing, where the stillness. All of this is still talking, is still associated with prakriti. It's still associated with the gunas. So until you get out of this completely and go into what's called nirbij samadhi, all of this that we talked about is sabij samadhi, right? It's referring to using something still. So when we look at, you know, kind of what this means to us, right? I think that's the biggest thing is, one, this whole debate around, do you need idol worship, do you not need idol worship, do you need something, you don't need something, or as an advanced person, I don't need this, I don't need that, is not true. Okay, our minds are so, it's so difficult to attain the state. And Patanjali Maharishi obviously recognizes this. So we need to use a channel, we need to start with the channel. If, especially as sadhaks, it is okay to take the help of something, to start focusing your mind on it, and use that object in itself to transcend. So really, as you look at your sadhana upasana, think about how you can get your mind to start being more focused, or get yourself to start being more focused on entering a deeper state of meditation. And sometimes that doesn't happen when you just sit down, close your eyes. It requires a lot of practice. And that is the biggest takeaway. In Sutra number 18, where he talks about all of this is preceded by abhyasa, by practice, he's saying you can't get there with an untrained soul or an untrained mind. You need to put in the work, right? And if an untrained mind or a soul attempts it, you can't sustain it. I mean, even a lot of us who do sadhana, it's hard to sustain certain states of meditation, right? Like you might experience that peace and calm, and that state, a lot of, some, it's very fleeting. You might experience that 1 second of peace, calm, no thoughts, I'm content, everything is good, I'm here now, and then boom, it's gone, right? Because it's very difficult. It takes a lot of abhyasa. So the biggest takeaway for us is practice, practice, practice. We need to keep at it. In Swami Vivekananda's commentary, very beautifully, it talks about how all of this is in our hands. We mold this path, and how this is achievable in this lifetime and this moment, if we wanted to, because we have the tools for it. And I think that is very important, because looking at this as something, oh, it's just for the rishis, or it's just for some other, very advanced being, like I'm not going to get to this state of mind, etc. It's a journey, and it takes time, it takes that process, right? And you have to give it that due time. It doesn't happen overnight, of course, unless you're graced by certain blessings and you've been at this for lifetimes, and you've just literally taken this birth to get into samadhi, right? Like there are so many great souls that have come on this earth like that. So the big takeaway is abhyasa. Second is the concept of pratyaya, like approach, like having that uh, huh, having that concentration on either an idol or a symbol or a mantra or a sound, whatever that is, making sure you've got that. And thirdly, I would say, well, something that I've kind of took away is not getting caught up in the magic, in a way, that happens, right? And this is something we all might have come across. People go into high states of meditation, they get siddhis, they get powers, and then they get stuck there. They want to just get more and more of those things, and they want to stay in that realm. So this is a reminder to say, even though we have just described to you the state of samadhi, that is still not final. There's something more. So don't get caught up in the magic, like I'm just, I had all these visions, and it happens. The amazing experiences happen when we're on the path of sadhana. It is to remind us that we're doing well and that we're growing, but the intent is to keep moving and not get caught in the traps, right?
Like seeing the blue light.
Mm. Right? So you will have some experiences because you're going through a transformation, and it will tell you certain things, and instinctively you will know where to go. You will be guided. But the key is not to, um, get trapped by it. So these two, I think, are very important, and it's very important to understand this fundamental, because as we go into the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali Maharishi breaks down how to get, like, just beautifully, the way he's broken down just samadhi, right? With vitarka vichara. Like, I found that, really amazing to think about it that way. It's like looking at the same thing under a microscope, looking at like a drop of water under a microscope. The kind of patterns that you see exist, but you can't see it with the naked eye. You need a different type of sense apparatus to view that beauty. So that is essentially what sadhana and upasana. Okay? All right, we'll pause there and see if there are any questions for today.
Wait, can I go to asampragya samadhi at some point without
Yes.
through the object?
Excellent point. Yeah. So samprajnata samadhi is something you get to following, kind of the process we talked about. You focus your mind on something, you transcend it. Asamprajnata samadhi, I almost think of it as a transition. It's transitory. So thank you for bringing that up. You reminded me. So in asamprajnata samadhi, what happens is a sadhak can use this. It's used as a transitioning pad. Okay, so think about it like, there are all these steps, and in between there's like a little bouncy pad where when you jump on it, it can take you higher or it can take you back this way. Okay, because in asampragyata samadhi you still have the remnants of samskaras that we talked about, which may sprout, right? Which means you have to go back to your dharana or dhyana stage. So it's like, almost, I think of it like, there's this, when you're about to go to sleep, there is that, I think it's like, I don't know if it's REM or something, right? Like, you're just, you're gonna just go vanish into sleep. It's that in between transition. But if someone did something at that point, you wake up and you've lost your sleep, right? That is a samprajnata samadhi, right? So to your point, you get to that. It's an intermix. So as you experience samprajnata samadhi, the in betweens is a samprajnata samadhi. And when you're refined enough, when you're ready enough, that propels you into a higher level, which is nirbija samadhi, which is the highest, you're completely, where there is stillness, there's no prakriti aspect, it's consciousness, it's there, that's it. So this is a very transitionary, and it's a very subtle and refined experience if you think about samadhi in itself, because it's the experience, it is the absence of experience, or even maybe to say the experience of absence. There's like a little bit of a difference. The experience of absence, you are aware that there is nothing. It's a more conscious nuance. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but essentially it's that in between. So yes, you can, once you get there, you can either go this way or that way. It's a transitionary, but it is a sequence. To your point, you have to go through the stages that we talked about. Essentially, a sadhak goes through these stages because that's when you're ready. Otherwise you're not able to see that. It's almost like having your headlights on and there's fog, and you can't see it till that fog clears, and you have to clear that fog through abhyasa. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, yes, please.
So in other sense, in real life, it just means that, like the memories of from childhood to whatever we carry until now.
Yes.
Like those memories could be the hurdles.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And you have to clear those ones in order to attain to the highest point.
Yes. So, if you all remember, at the early stages of the Yoga Sutras, we talked about the Antakarna, right? Man, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankar. The Chitta is basically that underlying memory, if you will, of conscious, unconscious mind, where you may have things not just from your early childhood that are deeply rooted in your Chitta, but from previous lifetimes that are sitting there, right? That have not sprouted, that may sprout this lifetime. So it is definitely addressing all of that. Because if you look at something, the reason we act the way we act, they're all influenced by the antakarna. It's the man, it's the chitta that's going to influence how you interact or respond to a certain situation if it didn't go well for you before, versus somebody who was in the same situation had a very different experience, so they might want more of that. With your man, the way you're able to perceive what's the man is able to perceive what's in the outside world. And on top of all this, you have the ego, right, which has its own game. So you have to transcend all of this, and to transcend all of this, we always say the buddhi, the divinizing of that intellect, is what is going to set the rest of them, right? It's the buddhi. When you allow awareness to seep into buddhi, when you refine your buddhi, purify your buddhi, and you divinize your intellect then runs the show, versus your man running the show, or your chitta or your ego running the show. So if you're in a dark room, the window that opens to the outdoors, allowing the light, is the buddhi. That is the one capable of absorbing that light and knowledge to elevate your soul, to elevate your evolution, so that you're able to do your viveka, right? Your discrimination, and you're able to have vairagya against things that don't serve you on the path. So yes, absolutely. Memories, our childhood experiences, trauma, whatever it is that we're dealing with, it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be addressed, looked at, understood. Understanding, I think the biggest thing is understanding yourself, right? Yeah.
एक मैं कुछ ऐड करूँगी. ऐसा नहीं सोचना है कि we will reach to samadhi only when we lose our memory, right? That's not it. It's almost like एक एग्जाम्पल मैंने बहुत पहले दिया था एक सत्संग में कि जैसे सपोज यू हैड अ कार एक्सीडेंट 15 years back and you ended up with a big scar on your face which was very painful and took a long time to heal. Now that it's healed completely, you don't have any pain. When you look at it, you don't have the pain. You don't even have the sadness of it, right? It's gone, but the memory of that accident is still there, isn't it? So योगा में बोलते हैं चित्त वृत्ति निरोध, बट वेदांत में बोलते हैं यू हैव टू रीडायरेक्ट योर एनर्जी, और माइंड का चित्त जो है रीडायरेक्ट करना है ऑन द हायर थिंग्स, बिकॉज माइंड ऑलवेज लाइक्स टू हैंग ऑन टू समथिंग. सो जैसे प्रत्यय बोला जो ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ मेडिटेशन है, इफ यू हैंग ऑन टू समथिंग, यू द इफेक्ट ऑफ ऑल दोज बैड मेमोरीज और सो कॉल्ड बैड मेमोरीज, उसका इफेक्ट अपने आप कम हो जाएगा. ठीक है, दैट इज मेन इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट. तो ऐसा नहीं सोचना है कि दैट oh, I have to get rid of all my bad memories to reach that state of yoga or samadhi. That's nothing like that. You can, for example, imagine a very silent lake, without any wind. Lake एकदम still है. अगर उस पे ऊपर के पेड़ से पत्ते गिर जाएं, leaves, तो lake disturb होगा? नहीं होगा. Still be very calm. तो उसी तरह माइंड भी है कि छोटे मोटे मेमोरीज हैं, वो मेमोरी का इफेक्ट कम हो जाता है. It goes in the backs of your mind, even though you had some really bad experience in life. It really doesn't bother you. It's just an incident for you at that point. So never think about getting experience or getting rid of any experience. No, let it be. वो आपको ऐसे स्टेज पे लेके जाता है वेदांत और योगा की स्टडीज की आई एम नॉट हैप्पी बिकॉज ऑफ दिस, आई एम हैप्पी इन स्पाइट ऑफ दिस. इन स्पाइट ऑफ माई मेमोरीज और एक्सपीरियंस और पीपल इन माई लाइफ, आई एम स्टिल हैप्पी. तो वो स्टेज आता है प्रैक्टिस से और समझ से. ज्ञान ज्ञान जब आता है तो दैट इज द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग, व्हाट यू सेड, अंडरस्टैंडिंग.
And I'll just add something, Archana ji, that you said, which is very true and very important. People talk about having positive attitude, thinking positively. It has a lot of history with our culture and our rishis having said exactly this, right? It is very important to consciously make the effort to bring in that understanding, bring in, if your mind is going to latch on to something, let that be a positive transformation in your life, right? Let it serve you versus taking you down a path that does not. So I think it's very absolutely important, and that is why with sadhana, when we are constantly practicing it, right, when we talked about the stages, How can you look at an object and end up being in love with it? How does that happen, right? It happens through a constant period of, or a constant journey of associating yourself with this bigger or higher consciousness than your little, sadness and complaints and this and that. So it's a continuous redirection towards that higher self, continuously identifying with that bigger me, bigger I that we talk about. Absolutely. Yes.
So just to summarize, the first aspect of samadhi, in that one still you are getting the thoughts. You started with focusing on whether it is a physical idol or a visual, like we start with our
Correct.
thinking about it. And then every time thoughts comes and you bring it back to that. That's what we are doing.
Correct.
But at the end of the first cycle, like the
Sampragnata. Yeah.
that thoughts will be still there, but will not be that frequent, and idol is no longer important. But thoughts probably will be still there. Am I right?
Yeah. So it's
You can repeat his question because
yeah. So the question, if I understood correctly, is in Sampragnata Samadhi, is the idol no longer important? Okay. And are you still getting those thoughts, or are you still like going through kind of that process?
Still
Something, yes. So here's the thing. I think so. The way probably I would describe it a little bit differently, in the sense that it's not that the idol is not important. You transcend the idol for the purpose that it was used. So the idol or the symbol, so it's like, you're resting your arm on the armrest, right? Because you're sitting, but after a certain time, if you think about it, the armrest is there, but you don't need that, for example, to sit on the chair, because you can sit comfortably. Or even if you have to lean forward, let's say you've practiced leaning at the gym or something, I'm just making this up to illustrate a point, like you've built that core strength to lean over without needing an armrest. You've transcended the armrest. So the role of this armrest changes, and I think the focus is more on your experience, less around the armrest. So your experience is, right now you needed the armrest to lean over, but with practice of whatever, building core strength or something, you don't need the armrest. You can lean over, you sit in your chair, you can lean over, you can look at whoever, right? So in Sampragnata Samadhi, the point is that, or the encouragement from Patanjali Maharishi, is to use this technique to enter into deeper states of meditation. He's not dismissing, because a lot of times I think, because there are so many schools of thought, right? We think that the best way to meditate, or the highest form of meditation, is, idol worship is not important. We don't care about gods and all that. All that is very, for the lower evolved people. But we're, kind of more evolved. We gotta just kind of go sit down and go into samadhi. The key is, you need a vehicle. We all need a vehicle, and that vehicle is what, using a vehicle like that is what's described in Sampragnata Samadhi. Now, when you take this experience, and let us say we run it in 0.25 speed, okay, it's almost like that. You take something and you run it in 0.25 speed, you slowly watch your states go, you're transitioning from one state to another as you refine yourself through the process of sadhana. Okay, so right now you're looking dharana dhyana, we're observing it, let's say in that dharana dhyana, the states before samadhi, you've got something to focus on, you've got your posture right, you're able to sit long enough, and you're trying to constantly bring your awareness. You're training yourself to constantly come back to this point. And we all know it's not easy. You can't you got to let it happen, right? You can't actively say, no, thought don't come, like that doesn't work, because we always say, yeah, the thoughts will come, don't bother, let it come and let it leave. You bring your awareness back. So you're bringing your awareness back to that center. Over time, what happens is the cessation or the vrittis or the ripples, if you will, they start to calm down. You're able to, when you bring your awareness back to the object, you're able to hold it for longer. So if today when you're doing dharana dhyana, if you're able to hold it for 2 seconds, so basically if we are able to bring our awareness back to the object and focus on it for 2 seconds right now, with abhyasa, the 2 becomes 4, the 4 becomes 6, the 6 becomes 12. So your experience is that 12 seconds, there's nothing coming in between. You see what I'm saying, Pradeep ji? Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thoughts or the things that come up are almost zero, if you will, in asampragyata samadhi. It's almost to a point where that mind in itself is going to dissolve. That the laya or the period that we talk about between these transitions are lost my train of thought. So the laya in itself is basically that period where you don't have that experience of the object. So if I'm experiencing the object and I'm looking at it, let's say I'm looking at an object and it's black, and I tell myself, I'm like, it's a black object, and then I'm like, okay, it looks like an animal. That is my second thought. Or it looks like an elephant. That is my third thought. Between these, there is a bit of a gap which is so minute. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very little. That gap almost is what you would equate to a sampranyata, like that in between phase. So with respect to samadhi, what Patanjali Maharishi is saying is, in a state where you have no experience of even this object that you're using to get into samadhi, is one step higher than the experience of using an object to get into samadhi. Agreed? Right? So he's talking about one of the highest states of samadhi where you're not using an object. But he's saying even in this phase, you have remnants of samskaras. This is not the be all end all. There's one level above this where everything is completely dissolved into the stillness. Even in asampragyata samadhi, when everything has ceased and you have just the remnants, even in that situation, you're still bound to prakriti. You're still bound to the gunas. You're still playing by the rules of creation and causation. It's still there. You might not be the active doer, or you might not, consciously be doing anything, but it's happening. It's still there. But when you pass that, the next step is you come into stillness. Stillness is complete consciousness, right? There's no creation, there's no prakriti, it's still. There's no moving energy, it's static. So goal of ultimate samadhi is going into the merging with that static. So until then, even the highest state of sabija samadhi, as we call it, is still just a state. It's still just a transition to get to one level above. And he recognizes that this is hard. A lot of commentaries that I came across in this, they recognize it's hard, which is why the emphasis on abhyasa, which is why the encouragement that you can do it. Because you have to try. We have to, to do something, you got to try. Maybe it's not this lifetime, it's a different lifetime. Maybe it is this lifetime. But the effort needs to be there, right? That is the whole part of Purusharth along with destiny.
Any more questions?
Yes, please.
So let's say, like in this lifetime, one of us have received the samadhi state.
Yeah.
With little bit of
Yes.
remnants.
Yes. All experience states of samadhi every now and then, right? We all experience certain states of stillness. The challenge is sustaining it. right? We all experience when we do our meditation, when we do our sadhana, we've all come across the microsecond or the second where we have felt, we have truly, we've tapped into that state, if you will. The challenge is in sustaining it, right? So typically when a soul is going through a journey, and what essentially the karmic theory is that you're coming back to exhaust your karmas. Basically, that's what's determining whether you're born again and you're going through birth and death. And as long as you are not free from this prakriti aspect, which is the maya, right? And your samskaras are still there, those seeds of karma are still there, you have to keep coming back because you have to get rid of all that. And that's what Maharishi is saying is, when you go one level higher, you go beyond these samskaras, and these samskaras are completely gone, completely burned through, nothing is sprouting, then yes, that is what is being referred to as a nirbhij samadhi, which is basically, you're one with consciousness, like you go back and you go home, essentially. So I think the question is, when we go through our sadhana, is how easy or hard it is for us to sustain certain levels of consciousness, sustain certain experiences, right? And the soul's journey, takes its own thing. Like we were talking about Swami Vivekananda this morning, and how, he would just sit and go into samadhi, like just sit, close his eyes and go into samadhi. And he would instruct, read this or heard this, he would instruct his disciples to come say a certain mantra in his ear to bring him back, because his work was not done. He had to do more. He had something he had to do here on this planet, right, before he completed his time here. So those are all determined by our karma. Those are all determined by the journey that the soul takes. So the key is, when we're doing our sadhana, as we do our, we follow this Raja Yoga, how do we even go from asana to pratyahara to, because we're still, a lot of us are in this asana, pratyahara, dhyana, dharana, dhyana, that kind of state. How do we
Transcend.
how do we transcend? How do we get beyond that? How do we go deeper? Are you happy with the depth that you're in with your sadhana? I think all of us, who are on the path, the answer is no, because you want to find out more. As you go on this path, you'll start to feel like, I want to see beyond this. I want to go a little bit deeper. I want to open that curtain and see what's beyond that. And then you see another veil. I want to go past that one. That is the journey, right, of sadhana, and that comes through that abhyasa. So the more we practice that, kind of need, or that hunger to go beyond whatever you're experiencing, that starts to set in, and that is the fire, right? That is the fire of tapas, and you go through that austerity, because then you want to understand the truth. Because all of this is coming back to, even when we do upasana, is coming back to, what am I doing? What is the true nature? Even if you're using an object, what is the true nature of that object? What is my relationship with that object? And as a result, what is my true nature? Our true nature, that is the biggest question. What is you? Who are you, right? That is the biggest question. So we're trying all of these to answer that big life question.
And I think satsangs definitely help us to give that, set that path forward. और जैसे हमने तत्वबोध में हम पढ़ रहे हैं क्षमा दमा, जिससे you are disentangling yourself from things, so you get more time to practice and अभ्यास करने के लिए या things like that. तो मुझे लगता है कि we are on the right path, मगर हम सबको और थोड़ा, we have to really learn how we can get more time by disentangling with things that really are not that important, because I think we get caught up with just a lot of stuff that maybe we don't need to. So that I felt that Shama Dama and
Yes.
the Shat Sampatis are so important to take us on that journey.
Absolutely. And I'll maybe end with this one thought and, hand it over to Archana ji, because I know she's up next. Absolutely true. And I read this where it said the highest form of intelligence is to design a life that you want. That is the highest form of intelligence. And when I read that quote, it really struck me because, all of us here are so smart. We have such high IQs. We have such brilliant jobs. We're running companies. We're doing everything. But designing our life is hard. A lot of us haven't figured it out, right? So if you want to live that kind of life, you have to change a lot of things. To your point, Gayatri, you're absolutely right. I think it is, yes, we need more time. We need to literally design our lives where this doesn't feel like almost like a stress or a push, right? Because unfortunately, we are all living that reality right now. We all have jobs, we all have families, young families sometimes. So it's very difficult to make that arrangement. But what I have personally experienced and know of people who've experienced this is after a certain point you decide to choose. You make a choice because the calling is so strong, and you tell yourself, well, this is my chance. As we were saying, this is in our hands, and if you want to get to that state, you can do it right here, right now, and you have the tools for it. But we have to make difficult choices sometimes, and there comes to a point where that choice doesn't seem very difficult because it's very clear in your mind what you want to do, what your goal. You figured out that the ultimate goal is to be on this path, and that means maybe I cannot do a job that's 12, 13 hours. Maybe I don't want to. you know I want to do a different kind of job. I want to focus on other things. So you make that choice. So I think a lot of sadhaks, what I've seen, and I've personally experienced this, is you get to a point where you can't do two things and you choose, and that choice determines how the rest of your life goes, right? And if you're in abhyasa and on the path of sadhana, the right choice will be made by you. So